Hello and welcome back to the course on blockchain. And today we're going to be understanding mining difficulty. Now, we did talk about mining difficulty when we talked about the mining target in module 1. However, today we're going to develop a much deeper understanding of mining difficulty. All right, so let's have a look. Today we're going to answer the following two questions. Number one is, what is the current target and how does that feel? And I'm a big believer in intuition, in understanding things on an intuitive level. And that's why we're going to aim to develop a feeling for the current target. How does it feel if you were a miner, mining Bitcoin or any other currency for that matter, how would it feel to have that difficulty imposed upon you? What would that imply? Because that understanding, in my view, is beyond that. Basic foundational understanding is when you understand things like logically and how they work. But that feeling for things will give you that is that intuition that can help you come up with ideas and see these things from a different perspective. And number two is, how is mining difficulty calculated? We're going to introduce the term. So we've been using mining target and mining difficulty interchangeably up until now, but they're actually separate terms, and we're going to introduce mining difficulty and see how the two are related. All right, so question one, what is the current target and how does that feel? Well, we already spoke about target in this tutorial in module 1, and as you recall, we agreed to use leading zeros to talk about the target. And what I wanted to point out here is that this chart, this diagram, is extremely disproportionate. And how can we see that? Well, right now it looks like by setting a target of 4 leading zeros, we are reducing this pool size, the valid pool size, to about a quarter. So this looks like a quarter of the total, right? However, if you, in a hexadecimal number, if you request even one leading zero, just one leading zero at the start, you're going to effectively reduce the pool size by 16 times. If you do 2 leading zeros, that'll be 16. It'll be 1/16 of 1/16. If you do 3 leading zeros, then this purple part, this valid part, will be 1/16 of 1/16 of 1/16. So it'll be tiny and wouldn't be even visible on this chart, on this diagram, if we tried to plot 4 leading zeros. And how do we get our heads around that? Well, the way I think about it is, let's look at a decimal system, number in a decimal system. Let's compare two numbers. One where you have 5 digits and one where you have 5 digits, but the first one has to be a leading zero. So effectively you have 4 digits. So in the first case, you have options from 0 to 99,999, 100,000 options. And in the second case, 0 to 9,999, it's only 10,000 options. So by requesting one leading zero, we're effectively reducing the pool size by 10 in a hexadecimal number, because every digit can have 16 values. Every leading zero is reducing the pool size by 16. So that's already helping us get a bit better feel for what's going on. So in reality, even one leading zero is going to significantly reduce our options, because right now it looks like if we pick any random number, any random nonce, then we'll have like a 25% chance of getting a golden hash. But in reality, it's much, much less. Okay. So let's develop that even further. So this is the current target. We'll talk about where to get it just now, a bit later. But this is our current target. Again, we're just going to focus on the leading zeros. The rest is like not going to make much of a difference compared to the leading zeros. Leading zeros, 18 leading zeros at the time of recording this video. And so let's do some estimations. What can we get from 18 leading zeros? We already saw what 4 leading zeros feels like. What does 18 zeros feel like? Let's do some estimations. We're going to calculate the probability of getting a golden nonce. Randomly picking a nonce and probability that that'll be a golden nonce. Well, how do we calculate that probability? First of all, let's see how many numbers with 64 characters, how many hexadecimal possible combinations are there? The answer is 16 to the power of 64, which is approximately 10 to the power of 77. So we're going to underline that with red. And then second question is, how many possible combinations are there? How many possible hexadecimal combinations are there with 18 leading zeros? Well, the answer is 16 to the power of 64 minus 18. That's because on this digit it has 16 options, 16 options, 16 options, 16 options, and so on, 16 options, and a total of, so 16 times 16 times 16 times 16, 64 minus 18 times, because we cannot touch these, we cannot replace these have to be zeros. 64 minus 18, that's approximately 2 to the power of 2 times 10 to the power of 55. We're going to underline that with green. And so, as you can see, that's our big pool, that's our total pool, and that's our restricted pool. That's our pool where the golden nonces are. As you can see, it's quite a lot of numbers, 10 to the power of 55. That's a lot of numbers. But in comparison to this one, it really fades. 10 to the power of 55 is almost nothing compared to 10 to the power of 77. And so the probability that a randomly picked hash is valid, or that a hash generated by a randomly picked nonce is going to be a valid hash, or a golden nonce is going to come from it's going to be a valid hash, basically. So the probability of that is 2 times 10 to the power of 55. That number divided by that number that's what we were after. That's the feeling. So just look at that number. That's the percentage probability of getting that the nonce that you pick is going to be a golden nonce. That's like a randomly picked nonce. How does that number make you feel? That's probably, like, I don't follow lotteries, but that's probably less chances than winning a lottery. How insane is that? That's what miners are doing. So no surprise that there's, like, those machines are working and working and working, because the probability that any given nonce is going to generate a valid hash, and therefore that machine or that miner is going to be allowed to create the block, is so low, is tiny. That's the problem, and that's with the current difficulty. As you can imagine, if the difficulty is adjusted, then the difficulty is increased, the number of leading zeros increased, then what happens? This number stays the same, but this number goes down, because 18 becomes like 30, and that means this will be lower, this will be lower, this will be lower, this will be lower again. So there we go. That's the feeling. Like, hopefully this illustrates that it's not like a 1 in 4 chance of getting a nonce. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny chance. That's what this whole cryptographic puzzle is about. And now we're moving on to question 2. It's a good segue into question 2. How is mining difficulty calculated, and how is it adjusted? So let's have a look. Mining difficulty, right? Difficulty, the definition, is the current target divided by the max target, where the max target is, we know the current target, that's our current target, and the max target is this, and we'll get to that in a second. So first, I wanted to make a comment. How often is difficulty adjusted? Difficulty is adjusted every 2016 blocks. Why 2016 has nothing to do with the year is because it's 2 weeks. Every block a block should be released every 10 minutes. So if you calculate that, how long it takes 2016 blocks released, it's exactly 2 weeks. Or how many blocks get released in 2 weeks? It's 2016 blocks. So that's how often the difficulty gets adjusted, every 2 weeks. And now the only thing that we still don't know here on the slide is the max target. Where did this come from? What is this target all about? Well, this max target is the target that was in place at the very inception of Bitcoin. They started out with this target. And so why did they start out with this target? With, this is not the maximum hash, maximum, hexadecimal number. Maximum hexadecimal number would be like F all the way. So like in a decimal system, it would be 99999. F is the highest digit in hexadecimal, so it would be all Fs. Why didn't they start with that? Well, the answer is that the one we're thinking about, the all Fs, is at the very top. It's like at the very top. So if they started out with the target at the time being at the very top, then every single time a miner would pick a nonce, it would be a golden nonce. So every single time they would just mine blocks very quickly. With every iteration, they would mine a block, and therefore they would mine out all of the Bitcoins too quickly, even before the first 2 weeks passed, to adjust the difficulty. So they intentionally started with a difficulty that was that already had a lot of leading zeros. It already had how many? 8 leading zeros at this time. Now we've already moved to 18. So this is the max difficulty at the time. This is at the very start. This is the current difficulty. And again, this is extremely disproportionate. So we know that this line should be a tiny little block there, and this should be even a tiny, small little block even over there. But just for illustration's sake, that's what we're seeing. And so how to understand difficulty on an intuitive level? Difficulty, because it's the current target divided by the max target, right? So it's basically this line, how high is this line, divided by how high is that line. What it's telling us is how much harder is it now to mine a Bitcoin compared to what it was at the very start. So how much harder has it gotten to mine a Bitcoin? That's exactly what difficulty says. So compared to at the very start of mining Bitcoin, how much longer does it take to mine a Bitcoin now? Not longer, because we know it takes 10 minutes. How much more power does it require? How less? How different is the probability? You know, the probability that we calculated before. What is the relationship between them? How much harder, in essence, how much harder is it to mine a Bitcoin? And yeah, and so there we go. What we're going to look at now is some charts to bring all this to life. All right, so here's blockchain.com, and we're going to go to so we can go to data. We can just pick a random block, and you can see from the hash. So where can you get the current target? Well, at least the number of zeros you can get from here. You know, like that is going to be 18 zeros, and because that's its hash. And you know, sometimes you might get one with 19 zeros or 20 zeros just by accident they guessed it. So best way to do is like look at a couple of blocks, and you'll see that they all have the same or previous block actually. They all have the same number of leading zeros, 18. Okay, that's number one. And the other thing is, what did we want to do? Oh, I wanted to look at the charts. So what I wanted to show you is difficulty. Where is difficulty? Mining information difficulty. There we go. So if you look at difficulty, you'll see the stepped chart. Why is it stepped? Because the difficulty gets adjusted every single 2 weeks. And by the way, also an important thing to note is that difficulty is not adjusted by any central authority. There is no like bank or anything or blockchain.com that says now the difficulty is going to be this or now the difficulty is going to be that. Not at all. We know that this is a decentralized system, and we know that there's no central authority, and that therefore difficulty gets adjusted by the nodes themselves. So if you install the Bitcoin software, your computer will be adjusting the difficulty on its own, because that algorithm is coded into the Bitcoin protocol. And yeah, and so they just all synced up in the sense that they know when, you know, the 2 weeks started and when the 2 weeks ends and so on. And like every 2 weeks, your own node is going to look at, okay, so how long did it take for the past 2016 blocks to be mined? And it knows that it takes about 10 minutes. It should take exactly 10 minutes to mine a block. So it should be 20,160 minutes. If it's more or less than that number, then the difficulty gets adjusted. That's how difficulty gets adjusted. Every node adjusted, and therefore, because the algorithm is the same, they all get the same difficulty. As you can see right now, the difficulty is 3 trillion. 3 trillion is the difficulty. And that means it's 3 trillion times harder to find a golden nonce than it was at the start of Bitcoin. And what I like about this chart is that right now I think it's like a year, and you can go to all time and you'll see how it changed. There, voila. So at the start, guess what the difficulty was? 1. Difficulty was 1 at the start because nobody was mining Bitcoin and there was no need to change the difficulty for a long time. Nobody really cared. And then people started mining it more and more and more. So as the mining power increases, as more players join, they start mining faster. That's the reason difficulty has changed. They're mining the Bitcoins faster and faster and faster. So the power, the aggregate power of the network is getting higher and higher and higher. And so the algorithm has to adjust in order to keep that consistency of releasing a Bitcoin or releasing a block every 10 minutes. In order to keep that consistent, the difficulty has to be adjusted. And the difficulty is adjusted, as we saw, through the number of leading zeros. So as you can see, it's a complex system overall, like philosophically. But what I like about it is it's beautiful in its elegance. It's beautiful in its simplicity. That all they're doing is they're changing the required number of leading zeros every 2 weeks. And that is keeping under control this whole swarm of miners and industrial level mining organizations and mining pools, as we'll see. That is all under control by a simple algorithm. And then if you compare that to banking, right, to the normal fiat currency, what do we have there? We have a central authority that is struggling to keep the economy under control by using macroeconomic factors such as or policies such as interest rates, right? So like we're going to increase the interest rate or decrease the interest rate, like the Reserve Bank of Australia increases or decreases the interest rate every quarter, as far as I know. And I think they're doing an alright job, but like still, it's so much calculation, so much work, so difficult, and there are countries that are not doing that a good of a job, and they have incredibly high inflation, or their currencies are going like getting becoming non-usable, and they have crises and so on. But at the same time, here we have something so simple compared to those systems, and yet it works. It works like magic, and it's able to keep under control. The proof that it works is that it's able to keep under control so many different players that have been coming up with different ways of mining. They use CPUs and GPUs and ASICs. We'll talk about this, and still the system works. The system is just prodding along. So very cool, and puts it into perspective how a decentralized system can actually perform as good or even better than a centralized one. All right, so there we go. Hopefully now you know everything about mining difficulty. And on that note, I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, enjoy blockchains.